Okay, cost of living follows directly on GDP because they are both related to inflation, quality of life, standard of living. So some basic things you're going to learn. What is the Consumer Price Index, abbreviation CPI? How is it calculated? How is it used? There are problems with the CPI. What are they? How big a deal are the problems with the CPI? Can they be compensated for? How is CPI different than the GDP deflator? Is one better than another? Are there circumstances that make one better than another, or is one better than the other all the time? And how do we use CPI in a similar way as we use the GDP deflator to compare one year to another and yet have a realistic comparison? And then how can we correct interest rates to accommodate for inflation? So, CPI measures your cost of living as a consumer. The consumer part of it is kind of included in CPI because it's specifically the Consumer Price Index. Good. So this does not apply to firms or the government. Okay. The CPI is particularly important in your life because it is the basis of cost of living allowances. For you, in terms of Social Security, not so important. But have you seen those commercials about, so you have an annuity and you need cash now? Called J.G. Wentworth, 877 cash now. Thank you for joining in on the chorus. An annuity is something that, let's say that Jackie from her car accident gets a big insurance settlement, like 6 figures, and the insurance company does not want to just write that check. So what they do is they say, okay, every 6 months we will send you a check for $2,500, and that will continue for the next 50 years. I don't know. Maybe every 6 months we'll send you a check for the $10,000 for the next 30 years. And so that amount under that annuity should contain a COLA, a cost of living adjustment, because that $10,000 that she gets in January this year is not going to be worth $10,000 when she gets it in January of 2025 or 2035, right? So they need to make sure that dollar amount goes up to account for the continuing inflation that goes up. Does this make sense? Okay. So CPI is really important. By the way, if they do offer you that, make sure the contract includes a COLA. Be like, my econ teacher taught us about CPI, and you're not going to stick it to me. All right, how do we calculate the CPI? We fix a market basket of goods that we will use to calculate the cost of living. So the BLS, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, says, here's what we think a typical consumer purchases. And it might contain a loaf of bread and a dozen eggs and a gallon of milk and. Okay? No, it is a government agency. No. Okay. Piece of homework tonight. You so rarely have homework. I hope you can handle this evening. Oh, I'm going to overload you, because you should always wait until the night before the current events quiz to study for the current events quiz, because I only quiz you over things that happen on Thursday night. So I think you'll be good. So piece 1 of your homework tonight. Find out what's in the current market basket. So this might involve you going to the Bureau of Labor Statistics website. Yes, go to the Google machine. Find out what's in that market basket. And then determine how much of that market basket actually applies to your family in your current living situation. Do they have you buying things in the CPI market basket that your family never buys? So then the second step is to find the prices. They go out and they collect data on the prices of the goods. And they do this all across the country. They actually create regional CPIs as well, because we know cost of living here is different than if you're living in San Francisco or New York or rural Mississippi. Okay. These things are all different prices. And so then they add everything up and compute the cost of the market basket. I don't know, someone once suggested that CPI in England must be calculated using the market trolley, since when they go to the grocery they use a trolley and not a basket. I don't know. It would be a fun thing to put into the Google machine. See? Okay, so how is the CPI actually calculated once we have the cost of the market basket? We take a base year, lots of base years in macroeconomics. So the CPI in any given year is the cost of the basket in the current year over the cost of the basket in the base year times 100. So what is CPI always in the base year? 100. Because hopefully when you divide the cost of the basket in the current year, and the current year is the base year, by the cost of the basket in the base year, you come up with 1, if you have mathed correctly. And then you multiply 1 by 100, and the CPI in the base year is always 100. So, similarity to GDP deflator, huh? Yay. In the market basket. That's probably about as current as you're going to get, too. I wondered if maybe you got excited when you said breakfast sausage there. When he said breakfast sausage. Not necessarily chorizo, but because you went to Village Inn yesterday to have the sausage links. Okay. Then you calculate the inflation rate, which is CPI this year minus CPI last year over CPI last year times 100%, because inflation is always in percences. How long is your average? Over how many years are you averaging? No, because you want to be able to compare. Well, when I was your age, okay, then we need to find the CPI in 1991 and compare that deliberately to this year, not to an average. Averages are meaningless. But the next time your parents say something like, well, when I was your age, actually do the math for them and point out to them that based upon the CPI, their recollection is incorrect. because most people have a pretty distorted perception of the past and when they were your age. We could go to the movies for a nickel. No, they couldn't. The movies were like $5, and if you were lucky, $3 for a matinee. All right, are we good? When I first started driving in 1990, late 1990, 89 cents a gallon-ish. They're lower. Yeah. They're lower. Yeah. You pay less for gas, and your cars get better gas mileage. My first car, the car I was given to drive, a 1976 Chevy Impala station wagon, nearly as old as I was, 2 years younger than me, got on a good day 7 miles to the gallon with its V8 engine. Yep. So I could go home and back from school 2 days for 89 cents. Okay, example. This is a very tiny and unhealthy market basket, almost guaranteed to give you high blood pressure and diabetes at the same time. So your market basket is 4 pizzas, 10 lattes, and understand that the market basket will soon include insulin. All right, in 2010, the price of a pizza is $10. It goes up to $11 in 2011 and $12 in 2012. How convenient is that? The price of latte increases 50 cents every year. So what is the cost of your market basket in 2010? No, not $12. How many pizzas and lattes are in your market basket? So $40 for pizza and $20 for lattes, so the total cost of your market basket in 2010 is $60. Yes. How often are they saying you're purchasing that market basket? Every week? Yeah. They calculate it by month. I would hope that you are not eating 4 pizzas and drinking 10 lattes every week. Holy cow. All right, so the cost of our market basket in 2011 is and the cost of our market basket in 2012 is 70 what? 78. All right. So now calculate CPI in each year using 2010 as your base year. You do. I watch. This is where you pick up your pencils and do work. Son. Michael, say chorizo for me again. Say it so pretty. Wait. Without doing any math, can you tell me what the CPI is in 2010? How'd you know that? Well, how should you have known that if you hadn't cheated off of David? Thank you. Which makes it even sadder that you had to cheat off of David. Because I thought I was funny. What's the equation for CPI in 2011? I didn't say what's the answer. I said what's the equation? 69 over 60 times 100. So CPI in 2011 is 115. And the equation for 2012 is 78 over 60 times 100. So CPI in 2012 is 130. All right, so now what do we do? Find the inflation rate. So the change here, 115 to 100 is 15 over 100 times 100. So the inflation rate in 2011 is 15%. Now the change here is 15. So the inflation rate will be? No, because what are we dividing by? We're dividing by 115. So the inflation rate is 13%. Be careful. Actually use the equation. No, the inflation from 2010 to 2012 is not 28%. Do the math. Do the math. No, just do the math. 130 minus over. So the inflation rate is 30%. From 2010 to 2012, the inflation rate was 30%. It didn't increase by 2%. When you compare 2012 prices to 2010 prices, they're 30% higher. When you compare 2012 prices to 2011 prices, because they're already that much higher, they're only 13% higher than 2011. Because it's a percentage of an already bigger number. It is cuz math, but the math is logical. Okay. More practice for you. Seriously, guys, do this so that it's not at all confusing to you when you have to do it on the test and on the homework, because you will. So, do it. I know you were loath to actually work, Aaron. What? Because everybody else is doing work. Except for Herndon, but... Sounds like a dance party next door. Good conclusion. It's not the price of beef per cow, so yeah. I'm guessing mad cow hit in 2012 and caused that dramatic price increase or something, because there was a shortage of sane cows. How can you tell a cow has mad cow? Instead of like, it's like, moo! 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 That's the first step in diagnosis. Moo! Because absurd is sometimes funny. And because you're picturing a whole bunch of cows standing out in a field going, moo! Okay, CPI in 2011. Start with the cost of the market basket in 2011. Did you all get 150? And then your CPI was 125. What else did you have to calculate in order to be able to calculate the CPI in 2011? You had to calculate the cost of the market basket in 2010, but it gave it to you, right? So if you didn't read everything and actually calculated it, silly you, you lost 30 seconds taking the exam. Read everything before you start working. So your CPI in 2011 was 125. Now, equipped with that, could you easily calculate the inflation rate from 2011 to 2012? Not until you first calculate the cost of the market basket in 2012 and then turn that into CPI. So what was the cost of the market basket in 2012? 210. What was the CPI in 2012? 175. Now you can calculate the inflation rate by subtracting what from what? 175 minus there's no 210. Is the cost of the market basket that's not involved in the CPI inflation rate calculation. It's CPI in 2012 minus CPI in 2010 over the initial year. It's 40% inflation. Yeah, I said over the initial year. The initial year of the equation. Confusion, questions? This is very much plug and chug mathematics. You just have to pay attention to what you're plugging before you start chugging. All right, what's in that there basket? What's the most expensive thing you suppose your household puts money out for? Don't, Miranda. The roof over your head. And then getting from here to there. And then what you put in your tum-tum. And everything else trickles down from there. Yeah. Are you buying new clothes every week? You're such a teenage girl. No, seriously, you pay for your housing a huge amount monthly. So if you break it down weekly, it's still proportionally a large portion. You eat every day multiple times. That adds up. You go places every day. That adds up. But you don't buy new clothes every day, or even every week, or even every month for most of you. Buy new clothes or new shoes every 3 to 6 months. How many pairs of jeans does one person need, right? You buy them before school starts. You buy a coat a year. Many of you probably are still using the same coat you've had for a few years. Say what? I'm a real man. I don't wear a coat. Okay, then. Okay. Why no go? Well, this is fun. Okay. Why are we not talking about problems? Okay. Okay, there is a problem with the market basket. It is called substitution bias. What happens in 2012? What do most consumers do in 2012? They buy chicken instead of beef, right? But sometimes the market basket doesn't change its quantities fast enough. And so we're still calculating the market basket on 10 pounds of beef and 20 pounds of chicken. But when the cost of your beef suddenly went from $50 a month to $90 a month, what do you, having to make ends meet for your family, do almost immediately When you pick that roast up and you look and you're like, wow, this is almost twice what it was last month. What do? You put that roast back down and you pick up another package of chicken breasts. And you turn your hamburger helper into chicken helper. Okay? You might even get real drastic, since chicken's more expensive too, and start picking up some tuna helper. Okay? But the problem with the CPI is it can't account for that fast enough. So is the CPI going to return us a number that's too high or too low? Why too high? Because I took a 50-50 shot. Yeah, you're assuming they're still going to spend the $90 on the beef, but they're not. They're going to spend more on the chicken, so overall they're spending less, but we're assuming they're spending more, so we calculate inflation as higher than it actually is for the consumer. Does this make sense? Yes. Okay. Your parents, for those of you who are seniors, are going to deal with this pretty soon. Because next August, most of you will go away, right? And mom's been shopping for X amount of groceries every week for however many years. And then you're gone. And what very often happens to those parents in those first couple of months when you're gone is that, God, there's a lot of food in the fridge, and why do we have so many leftovers? And, oh, it's because Aaron's not here eating us out of house and home anymore. And then when you come home for a month at Christmas time, you're going to go to the fridge and be like, there's nothing to eat here. And mom's going to be like, oh, you're back. I'll have to go back to the old shopping list for a while. That lag in realization of the circumstances is what causes this substitution bias. You'll be like, there's no Lucky Charms in the cupboard. And your mom's like, that's because adults don't eat Lucky Charms. Why is there only Cracklin' Oat Bran here? When did you guys get old? Okay. So instead of what the basket tells us, households actually bought 5 pounds of beef and substituted 5 pounds of chicken. So notice the name here. This is the household basket, and this is the CPI basket. So in 2011 and 2010, people bought this basket as determined by the CPI. In 2012, reality hit, and they made up their own basket and bought in different quantities. So what you need to do now is calculate what they actually spent, calculate what CPI thought they spent, and what's the real difference? What's the overstatement of inflation? So just real quickly, calculate the household basket instead of this 210, what they actually spend, and then do your division. So the cost of the 2012 household basket was $195. So CPI is already thinking consumers are spending $15 more than they actually are. So then that $195, what are you going to subtract from it to calculate CPI? $195 minus 150. And we already know that this inflation rate was, this inflation rate was calculated as 40%. So CPI is overstating inflation by 10% simply because it can't adjust for this dramatic price increase that quickly. It's a pretty big chunk, right? Okay, so breaking down and further explaining, our first problem with the CPI is substitution bias. So when some prices rise faster than others, consumers automatically substitute. You buy something else, okay, if there is a possible substitute. Okay? So you move to the things that are less expensive. Because the CPI basket is what's called a fixed basket, it's only adjusted every so often, that substitution doesn't get taken into effect. Sometimes instead of buying something else, you just buy less. I won't have an orange for breakfast and for dinner every night. I'll just have an orange for breakfast. Okay. So CPI, because of substitution bias, overstates the cost of living. You can virtually envision the multiple choice question over this, can't you? As a result of as a result of substitution bias, CPI, A, understates the cost of living. B, always gets it right. C, overstates the cost of living. D, is not affected by substitution bias. Yes? Okay, another problem. The introduction of new goods. What do you suppose is the problem here? Because the basket is fixed, when new goods come on the market, they aren't included there. So if you've been to Europe, you already knew about Nutella. But Nutella has just become a thing in the United States fairly recently, in the past year or two, right? Nutella? Okay. So, a good example that you've probably watched fairly recently is in the yogurt realm. We've got, used to be just like Dannon and Yoplait, and now there's Greek yogurt and probiotic yogurt, which makes Jamie Lee Curtis more regular. Good for her. Okay. The thing is, those didn't used to be out there, so when you bought yogurt, you chose Dannon or Yoplait or store brand. Okay? Now, there's more variety. You get to choose what works for you. If you're having irregularity issues, you're going to go with the probiotic yogurt, which may have a different price. You may need to buy it in different quantities than you've been buying before. And CPI's fixed basket can't account for that. Greek yogurt, more or less expensive than your everyday run-of-the-mill yogurt. Way more expensive. But if you decide, that creamier taste is so much better, and that's what you switch to, now all of a sudden CPI is being understated because you're spending more for your fancy Greek yogurt. Okay? They are assuming that CPI is overstating in this instance because your more effective use of the dollars to meet your needs by buying your Greek yogurt or your probiotic yogurt makes that dollar more valuable to you because you're getting more value out of the good which serves you better. Does that make sense? Okay. I can buy a pair of plastic and rubber flip-flops at Walmart for $5 in the spring, right? Or I can buy an orthotic pair of flip-flops for $50 in the spring. Those orthotic flip-flops are probably going to last me a whole lot longer than my $5 Walmart pair, right? I'm going to have to buy those much more frequently. So where are my dollars more valuable to me? On the orthotic flip-flops, right? So CPI is going to overstate. And then unmeasured quality changes. Sometimes the stuff we buy actually gets better. I know. Now with new improved stain cleansing powers. Okay. So if I've been buying my Tide and I'm still getting the same amount of Tide, but the Tide does a better job than it used to, that Tide is more valuable to me. Yes? Yes. So labor statistics tries to account for some of that. Quality is hard to measure. Quality is hard to measure. So CPI is going to overstate again. It's assuming you're only getting 498 washes out of that jug of Tide instead of 500. You look disbelieving, Aaron. Okay. So all of the problems that we've listed here cause overstatement. And the Bureau of Labor Statistics makes technical numerical adjustments when they publish their figures, but near as we can guesstimate, essentially they're overstating by about 0.5% a year. It's still better than guessing overall. It's a reliable-ish source of information. When it really matters is because of those COLAs. All of a sudden, we're paying Social Security recipients 0.5% more than they actually need because we overstated inflation. And if you do that year after year after year, you're costing the government a whole lot of money. Current events tomorrow.